The earth was red, fine, clinging to your nails like it didn't want to leave. My father used to say it was land with strong roots, that it yielded good corn, fragrant coffee, and children of one's word. I grew up on that soil, running barefoot, listening to stories told beside the wood-burning stove. We had no luxury, but we had a sense of belonging that today seems rare. The land was ours, not because the deed said so, but because our history lived there. My father died with his straw hat on his chest and calloused hands. At his wake, it was as if the world stopped for a second. I, the eldest daughter, was left with the task of caring for the property, despite my limited schooling, despite my fear. My siblings left early. What remained for me was that land, and the little daughter I was raising alone. She, my girl, my bright-eyed girl with big questions. From a young age, she said she wanted to change her life, that she didn't want the hard life of the farm. And I understood. I felt in my heart that sharp pang of pain mixed with pride. Because every mother wants to see her daughter fly, but nobody tells you the nest feels empty when the bird finally leaves. I did what I could to give her an education. I woke up early, tended the crops, sold cakes at the market. One year I worked cleaning a school in the city, just to pay for her tutoring course. And when she passed her college entrance exam, I cried in secret in my room. Pride and fear, again. Pride at seeing her grow. Fear that she would grow so big she'd forget me. Years passed. She became a young woman, graduated. She met a young man, one of those who speak well and carry themselves like businessmen. She told me she was going to marry him, that she wanted something beautiful, worthy of the life she'd dreamed of. And I wanted to give her that gift. I wanted to be the mother who makes her daughter's dream come true. That's when I suggested selling the land. It wasn't easy. I spent 3 sleepless nights holding the deed in my hands. I remembered my father, my childhood, my feet caked in mud. I remembered the promises I made to never let that land go to outsiders. But I also remembered the sparkle in her eyes, the hope, her constant refrain. Mom, I'm going to get you out of this life. I sold the land, for a good sum, but nothing to change the world. I took the money and handed it all to her, trusting that I was planting a future. She cried. She hugged me. She said she would never forget, that I was the most generous woman in the world, and I believed her. The wedding was a spectacle. Decorated church, elegant buffet, princess dress. Everyone praised it. They said it looked like something out of a soap opera. And there I was, in the simplest dress at the party, but with my heart full. I smiled on the outside but cried inside, because I knew something was changing. I was there, but I no longer belonged to that world. After the celebration, she invited me to live with them. She said she wanted to repay me, to take care of me, and I accepted. Not because I needed to, but because I still thought love would suffice. I entered the new house with hope in my heart. It was modern, full of glass and silence. There was no smell of cooking, no sound of an old radio. But there were promises of affection, of a fresh start, promises I took seriously, and which, in no time, began to unravel. In the first days after the wedding, everything seemed harmonious. I tried not to get in the way. I walked slowly, spoke softly, asked permission before using anything. I felt like a guest in the house I had helped build with my sweat, and that already hurt. But I thought, it's just the beginning. She's still adjusting. The marriage is new. Everything will fall into place. I began helping in the kitchen, as I always had. I organized the cabinets, washed the curtains, made that pot of beans she'd loved since childhood. On the first day, she praised me. On the second, she said the seasoning was different. On the third, she didn't say a word. And on the fourth, she asked me to let the housekeeper handle it. I accepted, with a muted heart. I, who spent rainy dawns covering the cracks in our old house so she wouldn't feel the cold, was now politely dismissed from seasoning the beans. She and her husband went out often. Expensive restaurants, quick trips, business events. And I stayed, alone, sitting on the veranda of the new house, staring at the sky as if waiting for some revelation. And every time I heard the gate close, I felt my chest tighten. Not because I wasn't invited, but because I had become dispensable, invisible. I remember one Sunday in particular. It was Mother's Day. I woke up early, dressed carefully, put on that blue dress she said suited me. I baked a simple cake and left it on the table. I waited. Hours passed. When they finally arrived, they came carrying bags from a fancy bakery. They didn't even look at my cake. She handed me a gift, a branded scarf. I thanked. Her, of course. But inside, all I wanted was a tight hug. Later, I saw the photos on her phone. She had spent the morning with her mother-in-law, lunch with his family. I was only a pit stop, a duty fulfilled. And then I began to realize that the space I occupied there was symbolic. I was the sacrifice that made that lifestyle possible. But I was also the inconvenience, a reminder of her roots, of the farm, of a simple life. It was more convenient to keep me around, but quiet, grateful, yet contained, loving, yet invisible. Still, I persisted in helping, folding clothes, tending the garden, cleaning the bathroom when the maid was absent. And her? She'd say I was too eager to help, that it took too much effort. And when I stayed silent, she said I was resentful. There was no right place for me. One afternoon, while she was entertaining a guest, I overheard something that cut me to the core. She was explaining to her friend how they'd financed the wedding. She said her husband got a good loan. I froze. A loan? Had my father's land been erased from the story? I waited until the guest left. Then I asked without confronting her, "Daughter, why didn't you mention our sale?" She was flustered, then said she didn't want to expose our simple life to city folks. Those words, simple life, stung as if my entire existence had been downgraded to an embarrassing footnote. Yet I was still there, still believing that love could be made visible. I prepared a photo album, records, of her childhood, the farmhouse, her first party dress, the coffee harvest where she played house with corncobs. I presented it carefully, saying it was a reminder of our story. Days later, I found the album at the back of the pantry closet, among old newspapers. It had never been opened, and that's when something began to shift inside me, slowly, like water seeping through a wall. At first you don't see it, but eventually the mold takes over. It wasn't revolt yet. It was silence, a new silence, dense. That made me wonder, have I erased myself so completely that I no longer know who I am? I had ceased to be the owner of my story, of my voice, of my legacy. But what I didn't know was that even greater humiliations would come, and that they would be the push I needed to awaken, not as a mother, but as a woman. Rejection, when veiled, has a cruelty of its own. It's not a slammed door, not a scream. It's the smile that feigns affection while emptying you out. The "I'm fine" spoken coldly. The invisibility masquerading as politeness. In the first months after my daughter's wedding, I tried to adapt to the new routine. The house was modern, with white walls and huge windows. Everything was automated, sensor lights, ambient music, digital assistants. But there was no sound of life, no smell of fresh cooking, clatter of pots, backyard laughter. I felt like an antique piece of furniture out of place, a black and white portrait in a filtered digital world. She, my daughter, began, changing her tone of voice with me. Before she called me Mama. Now it was always Mom. Dry, direct, formal. Gestures of affection disappeared. Hugs became pats on the shoulder. And her gaze, the look that once sought me out in any crowd, now passed right through me. At first, I justified it. I told myself it was the wedding, the adjustment, adulthood. We invent excuses so we don't see what hurts. But the signs multiplied. One day I went to sit down at their dinner table. There were 3 plates. As I took my seat, she stood and said, without looking at me, "Oh, Mom, I prepared a tray for you to eat in the laundry room. It'll be more comfortable for you." I was speechless. My face burned. My son-in-law pretended not to hear. I rose silently, took the tray, and sat in the hallway beside the washing machine. I chewed each bite with difficulty, swallowing a lump in my throat that wouldn't go down. I didn't cry that day. The tears stayed locked inside, but something inside me snapped. A fine crack, almost imperceptible, but irreversible. Other small things began to happen. My clothes started disappearing from the clothesline. One day I found some pieces balled up in a black trash bag near the garbage bin. She said they were old things. One of those pieces was a dress my mother had sewn by hand. "It doesn't match the style of the house anymore," she said. She began treating me as a functional object, not as a person. I was useful, as long as I was silent. If I cooked, fine. But if I tried to give input, she frowned. If I laughed too loud, she asked for more discretion. If I turned on country music, she would switch it off and say, "Let's keep the environment neutral." And the worst of it all, I obeyed. Out of fear, out of shame, out of that old desire to be accepted. I made myself smaller with each passing day. I moved through the house like a shadow. I asked permission to open the refrigerator. I apologized for coughing. One night, I heard her say on the phone, "My husband's mother is a dear, polite, discreet. Mine is tougher. She still has that country bumpkin vibe." Country bumpkin vibe. Those words pierced me, as if my history, my way of speaking, my entire identity were a flaw, something to be hidden, corrected, discarded. I tried to talk. I asked if she was okay, if I was bothering her. She replied with a cynical smile. "You complicate everything, Mom. You're always feeling rejected." That's not it. Then she went back to her phone. I began writing. Letters I never delivered. Notes I kept in a drawer, just so I wouldn't scream. One read, "I'm becoming an extra in my own life, a mistake no one dares voice." Another said, "She erased her mother, but kept the money. I was an investment, not family." Parties started happening in the house. Birthdays, dinners with her husband's friends, company gatherings. At none of them was I included. I was told to stay in my corner. One day, during one of those parties, she locked the door to my room. I had no access to the kitchen or main bathroom for hours. I sat on the bed and listened to laughter on the other side of the wall. I ate a stale roll. I prayed in silence. And I wondered, is this how love ends? One day, she needed me to fetch a document from her closet. Unintentionally, I glimpsed a file with wedding records, budgets, contracts, and a paper with my signature on the land sale deed. Next to it, a handwritten note. Getting this money was easier than I imagined. Those words tore me apart, not just for their content, but for the tone. It was as if my love had been exploited strategically, as if my devotion had been calculated, anticipated, used. After that, I began to watch more closely. I noticed how she spoke of me to others. "Oh, my mother lives here, but she's very reserved. She likes being in her own corner." Socially acceptable lies to hide contempt. And me, silent. But silence, my daughter, isn't the absence of sound. Sometimes it's the only sound of a fury that hasn't exploded yet. One day she hosted afternoon tea for her mother-in-law. She prepared everything with care. Fine china, lace tablecloth, delicate hors d'oeuvres, French music. I watched from the veranda. When I tried to approach with a timid smile, she cut me off in the middle of the room. "Oh, Mom, this gathering is more intimate, you see? Just his family." I smiled, a smile of ice. Just his family. That sounded like a verdict. I, who brought her into the world, who bled for her, had become an intruder in the salon I helped build. That same day, I heard her mother-in-law ask, "And your mother, does she live far away?" And she answered without hesitation, "She's staying with us for now, but we're looking for a more suitable place." I didn't react. I went downstairs and out to the backyard. I sat on the cold ground among neglected potted plants. I took a deep breath. The pain was so intense it hurt my scalp. But in that moment of blatant rejection, something arose inside me. Something I couldn't yet name. It wasn't vengeance. It was dignity, pleading not to die. I began to pull back. I stopped cooking, stopped washing, stopped trying to please. I stopped waiting. I began to observe, like someone gathering evidence before making an important decision. I noticed she only spoke to me when she needed something, that my photos had vanished from the shelves, that my memories were locked in boxes in the back room, a windowless room where they'd moved me after a renovation. They said the space would be more practical. The bed linens I'd used for years were replaced by cold white sheets. The pillows smelled of chemicals. My personal items, comb, notebook, Bible, disappeared from the bedside. They gave me a new piece of furniture, the house standard. Nice, but soulless. Inside that room, the silence was heavier. I started having nightmares. I dreamt I knocked on the door and no one opened. I dreamt I screamed and no one heard. I woke up drenched in sweat, my chest burning. One day I confided in a neighbor. I told her, sparing the details. She took my hand and said, "You don't owe anyone anything more, ma'am. "You've done enough." And those words hammered in my mind for days. "You've done enough." I began to remember my father's land, the smell of freshly harvested coffee, the feeling of belonging, and I realized that by selling that land, I had lost more than material property. I had lost my frame of reference, my anchor, but deep down, I understood that the land never left me. It was still in my calloused hands, in my steady step, in my ancestral courage, and that's when I decided, I will not die alive. I made a list of what I still had. An old wedding ring, a gold ring from my mother, a small box containing papers left over from the land sale, and I started to think, what can I do with this? I began leaving the house at different times. I made up excuses that I was going to Mass, but really I was networking with old contacts. I visited an accountant friend of my late brother. I brought the papers, asked for advice. I met again with an elderly lady who owned the boarding house where I once worked, and little by little, I wove a discreet, elegant, strategic network. I returned to writing, but now plans. In a notebook hidden among my undergarments, I began sketching my exit plan, my fresh start, my rebirth, and I promised myself I would leave without drama, without a fight, without tears. I would leave as one leaves a war, standing, tall. They say the death of a relationship doesn't happen with a shout, but with an accumulation of silences, and it was so with me. I died a little at a time in that house, one gesture at a time, one cutting remark, one averted glance, one denied memory. But what I didn't know was that my crucifixion would come not with thorns, but with fine china and French perfume. It was her father-in-law's birthday, a pompous, vain man who'd always looked down on me. The house was fully decorated, white, flowers, embroidered napkins, gloved waiters, classical music, everything orchestrated to resemble a film scene, and I, as always, was informed at the last minute, "Oh, Mom, tonight we'll have a more private celebration. Better you stay in your little corner, okay?" My little corner. That back room with its stuck window and musty smell. The same place where they once set my plate on a plastic tray because the good dishes were all in use. But that day, something in me refused to stay silent. I dressed in my best dress, that navy blue one that had endured the years. I fastened my hair with a pearl pin. I put on my mother's old necklace, and I walked into the living room, not in anger, but in dignity. I stepped in slowly, standing near the door without fanfare. I saw my daughter laughing, surrounded by compliments, everyone seated around a table lit by candelabras. When she saw me, her eyes froze. Then she walked over with a smile that never touched her eyes. "Mom, I asked you, this event is for the company. It's important to maintain a certain visual harmony." Visual harmony. She said it for all to hear. I felt like a blot on the canvas she wanted to display. They escorted me to the laundry room, a narrow corridor between the wash tub and cleaning supplies. There they placed a folding table with a plate, a cup, and a paper towel. The food was the same as at the party, but in that humid space, it felt like leftovers. I sat down and chewed each bite slowly, not for the taste, but because every mouthful confirmed it. They no longer considered me human. At the end of the party, I heard guests praising the arrangements, the music, the family's elegance. "She looks like she was born with a silver spoon," someone said of her, and she smiled. She didn't correct them. She didn't speak a word about the woman sitting among buckets and dirty rags. When it was all over, she handed me a small box with perfume inside. "A little gift," she said. I didn't open it. I took it to my room and placed it in the drawer. Each of her gifts felt wrapped in contempt. I spent that night awake on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I wondered where I had lost myself. When I stopped being a mother and became an inconvenience. And then, something changed. It wasn't rage. It was a kind of clarity, a serene coldness, like water turning to ice. I saw myself as someone watching a sad movie, and finally realizing the ending didn't have to be that. The next morning, she and her husband rushed out to some social engagement. I stayed behind. I opened my old suitcase, the one I never fully unpacked. I took out the notebook where I'd been writing my thoughts. I reread everything, pages upon pages of pleas for love, attempts at acceptance, fear of loneliness. And there I realized the loneliness I so dreaded was already living inside me. So I decided, I will no longer beg for a seat at the table. I will build my own home, even if it's made of bricks of silence and dignity. I began to act. And like every woman who's been humiliated too much, I planned my exit with an elegance they never imagined I had. After that night, in that hallway of contempt, I knew there was nothing left to save there. Love that becomes obligation is already dead, and respect that had been buried under expensive china and false smiles. But I still had something precious, myself, and though buried under years of contempt, I was still there, whole, in silence. The next morning, as she and her husband hurried off to another meeting, I remained seated at the table with a cup of coffee I made just for me. No sugar, no cookie, but flavored with resolve. For the first time, I wasn't there to serve them, but to survey the field before the battle. My plan didn't begin with shouts or outbursts. It began with pen and paper. I took out my old hidden notebook and listed everything I still owned. My mother's gold ring, an old family brooch, a small sum left from the land sale, which she never knew remained, the contact of my brother's accountant friend, and my memory of who I was before I reduced myself to a servant's role. In the following days, I moved with the same calm I once exhibited in serving. But now, every movement had purpose. I washed the dishes patiently, tidied my room meticulously, but in the spaces between chores, I made calls. I wrote letters. I updated my social security records. I assembled documents that had been hidden, some even in the back of the storage chest. Yes, I became invisible. But now, by choice, while they believed my silence was submission, I was stealthily building my escape. I went to the government bank, then to the Social Security office. I presented documents, endured lines, enlisted the help of a church social worker. I learned I was entitled to back benefits I'd never claimed. I feigned frailty for the clerk. She helped expedite the process. Within 2 weeks, a modest sum landed in my account, enough to rent a room, and to begin. I reconnected with Mrs. Carmen, the landlady of the boarding house where I worked as a young woman. She welcomed me with open arms. She said she had a back room with a private bath. Simple, but clean. Take it as long as you need, she said. I wanted it. I just didn't say so yet. It wasn't time. Meanwhile, at home, I continued playing the role they expected. The silent mother, the compliant grandmother, the lady who lives in her corner. But inside, I was sharpening my tools. I reviewed the land sale documents and discovered a small amount never declared. Money kept in a forgotten account in my name. I went to the bank. It was there. With that, I bought the ticket. Yes, a bus ticket to the town where I was born. I wanted to see the old house, or what remained of it. I wanted to step on the land I'd sold, not out of regret, but to close the circle. I cried on the journey, not in sorrow, but in liberation. Upon returning, I packed my bag calmly. I took only the essentials: documents, my notebook, 3 changes of clothes, an old photograph of my mother, and the necklace she gave me on my 15th birthday. The rest I left behind, because when you're reborn, you carry no junk. I wrote a letter, short, clear, cold. I'm not leaving out of anger. I'm leaving for myself. You no longer need to pretend to tolerate me, and I no longer need to beg for space. I left the letter folded on the living room table, and I walked away. No noise, no slammed door, no tears. The maid saw me. She tried to ask where I was going. I smiled. Now it's my turn to live. And I went. I arrived at my new room at dusk. The sunlight streamed in through the wooden window slats, casting golden bands across the simple floor. Mrs. Carmen's back room was small, but to me it felt like a palace. It smelled of coffee and laundry soap. Not luxury, but dignity, autonomy. In those first days I didn't do much. I woke early, sipped coffee with day-old bread, washed my clothes by hand, sat on the veranda, watching the street. It was as if my body needed to remember what it was like to be at peace. Every small task was an act of rescue. Hanging laundry, I'd think. I exist. Sweeping the floor, I'd whisper, I am free. With the benefits money, I paid 3 months' rent in advance. With the remainder, I bought a used sewing machine. I began mending clothes for neighbors. Nothing major, hems, simple adjustments. but enough to move my fingers and my soul. I made handcrafted business cards. I distributed them at the market, at the corner beauty salon, at church. Before long, orders started to come in, and with them, compliments. "Ma'am, you sew like my grandmother used to. I've never seen stitches so neat." I smiled, because it was more than sewing. It was stitching myself back together. A month later, my daughter sent her first message. Short, direct. "Are you okay?" I didn't reply, not out of spite, because it still wasn't the right time. She needed to feel the echo of emptiness, to taste her own silence. 2 weeks later, another message. "We missed you at Marcos's birthday dinner." I ignored it. I had a different engagement that evening. I was delivering a refashioned dress to a girl going to her school dance. The third message arrived with a request. "Could you come over just to help with Sunday lunch?" That's when I replied, with just 4 words. "Today, I cook for myself." There was no response, and I smiled, because in that brief reply, I gave myself the respect she never knew how to give me. Months passed. I set up a small atelier in my room. Mrs. Carmen gave me a sign as a gift. Dona Luisa's sewing, stitches as strong as life. I hung it on the door with pride. At the market, people began calling me by name. Dona Luisa from the atelier, no longer so-and-so's mother, no longer the lady from the White House. I, again, whole. One day, I sat alone on a park bench. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, God, for getting me out of that house," before I lost myself completely. And a gentle breeze stirred, as if in reply. That's when I knew, truly, that my vengeance was complete. Not a vengeance of shouting, but of presence, of rebuilding, of self-respect. They never sought me again. Maybe from shame, maybe from pride, maybe because, now that there was no land to sell, no lap to exploit, they didn't know what to do with me. And that's fine, because what they lost, I gained back. Today, when someone asks where I live, I proudly say, in a little place that's mine alone, where no one serves me on a plastic tray or tells me to shut up. And those who hear it smile, as if they don't grasp the weight of those words. But to me, they're a hymn of freedom. Mrs. Carmen's boarding house became my temporary home. But my true home, I rebuilt within myself, brick by brick of self-esteem, cement of silence, walls painted with respect. I learned to listen to myself, to welcome myself, to protect myself from those who brush off your pain as just her way. It's been almost 2 years since I left that house. I never went back, not even to the doorstep, not out of hatred, but because there, I ceased to exist. And when you return to where you died, you risk being buried again. My daughter tried to find me once. She came to the pension and knocked on the door. She said she needed to talk. I saw her through the window. She looked smaller, not in height, but in pride. She carried bags, perhaps gifts, perhaps apologies, but I didn't open the door. I asked Mrs. Carmen to tell her. She doesn't receive visitors without notice. Then I went back to my sewing, in silence. She never returned. I heard through others that they faced financial trouble, that her father-in-law fell ill, that their marriage was rocky, that maybe they would have to sell the house. I swallowed that news with the calm of someone who wishes no one ill, but offers herself as the foundation no more. Because you see, I'm no longer fertile ground for ingratitude. Today, I live off my atelier. With few resources, yes, but with all the freedom in the world. I have my routine. I wake early, have coffee with grilled bread, walk in the square, sew, chat with neighbors, attend church. None of it makes headlines, but it brings peace. The other day, a young woman brought me her graduation dress. She said, "You were recommended as the best seamstress in the neighborhood." I smiled. I thought of everything I lost to get here, and I replied, "I'm not the best. I'm just someone who learned to sew herself back together. At night sometimes, I still dream of my father's land, my feet in the red clay, the smell of burning wood, his voice saying, 'Daughter, no man will overshadow you if you know where you come from.' And I answer in the dream, 'Now I know, Dad. Now I know.' And if you, my sister, have read this story to the end, I want to tell you something. Don't let anyone treat you like leftovers. Not a child, not a husband, not anyone. Your love is a gift, not an obligation. Your presence is presence, not a burden. Your past is roots, not shame. The respect they denied me, I gave back to myself. And today, I sleep in peace, even without her. If you've listened to this story to the end, then perhaps it's yours too. Perhaps you too have given everything and received crumbs. Perhaps you were used, erased, humiliated by those who should have honored you. But hear me, from the bottom of my soul, you do not deserve to be treated like leftovers. You are roots, you are foundation, you are history, and no one has the right to reduce you to silence. If this story touched your heart, comment below. I too was reborn in silence. Let's show that there is a legion of women who learn to live again, after rejection, ingratitude, abandonment. Share this video with a woman who has suffered in silence. Sometimes all she needs is to know it's not too late to stand up. It's not too late to reclaim her name, her peace, her light. God has not forgotten you, and the respect the world denied you, you can give it back to yourself.